Welcome to another edition of Driving Perilously on the way to work. So at the moment, there's a subtle end of a rainbow toward my work. I'm heading out on the only road that goes east and west to get to where I'm going. And the policemen use it to catch people who are speeding. So I'm not speeding. Well, I wasn't speeding. My foot got a little heavy, so I was speeding after I stopped thinking about it and started talking. There's a little subtle rainbow that I can see the end of, and then it fades slowly into the sky, and I just see that little bottom part, and it's very nice. And it's raining. It's been raining for a couple days. I just got back from vacation, and I went to the nation's oldest city, which is called St. Augustine. I did a lot of tourist things, including reading lots and lots of historical markers. And one of the things my traveling companion and I noticed was there wasn't one mention of why it was named St. Augustine. So I wanted to Google it, but I forgot. I had to put my phone away at work, and I can't Google anything right now. Unless I want my video to be extremely interesting. And that's when I think of things to Google, is when I don't have my phone with me. But I wanted to see why the city was called St. Augustine. I also want to know why some cities are San and Santa, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and others are Saint, when they were all founded by Spanish people, most likely as missions and by religious names, but some have changed the San and the Santa into Saint, the English, and some have not. I think that's interesting. I guess in St. Augustine's case, sure, it was founded by the Spanish, but then there was an English occupation, they called it, and then there was another Spanish rule, one with the monarchy, one with the Republic of Spain, and then there was the American rule, which I think was 1821. I like to get all those dates straight, but I do not have them straight. Like lots of parts of America or United States, different empires controlled the same city throughout the years, and so the cities show influences from those various cultures. And they talked a little bit about the architecture that the French brought. They talked a lot about the Menorcans. The island in the Mediterranean, there's Majorca, major, and there's Menorca, minor. And they talked a lot about them. There is an emphasis on race and how wonderful the underrepresented races are. They don't talk about how wonderful the occupation and occupiers were, but they love to talk about the people that were oppressed. And I understand that to some degree. When I was a youngster playing Lone Ranger and Tonto. I wanted to be Tonto because obviously Tonto, as a representative of a culture that was being destroyed or at least disappearing, was obviously better and more moral than the Lone Ranger, to my way of thinking at the time. And then of course I came to question that, because it's easy to have the character that's not the main character be represented as a nice, good guy with hardly any flaws, because you don't have to talk about him as much as the one that needs to be a little more interesting. So the idea of the noble savage is condescending. I'm sure it has some empowering qualities. If I was Menorcan, I might like to hear what my ancestors went through, and I might want to see them in a positive light. But, you know, the people that ran the city did some positive things too. And I'm sure the Menorcans did something wrong. One of them kicked their dog once. Anyway, so we've got St. Augustine. Some of the trivia that I do remember is that the lions, the marble lions on the ends of the Lions Bridge, they said they were carved from the same marble that Michelangelo's David was carved from. That's interesting. How do you verify that? And why do I question that? Why do I question everything? There was a statue of David at Ripley's Believe It or Not. Speaking of tourist places, they said it used to be at the intersection, but it caused, I don't know, kerfuffle because he's naked. And so they put him behind a hedge maze that covers, you know, him from the chest down. Another piece of trivia was that Florida has the second most amount of lighthouses in the United States, Michigan the first. Another one was that in the many cities that have streets, boulevards, and avenues named after Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there are only 2 of the streets that are now named after him in which he actually marched down. So 2 streets in 2 cities currently named after him that he actually used to make his points when he was alive. One is in Atlanta and one is in St. Augustine. That would take some work to verify because there's so many Martin Luther King boulevards and so forth. I wonder if any of them are called Reverend Doctor, or if any are called Martin as opposed to Dr. Martin. So all these things I wonder, and I'm overwhelmed with things that I wonder that I'll never check, that I'll never research. And I enjoyed my time in St. Augustine. They talked a lot about Ponce de Leon, who arrived in Florida in 1513. Menendez? I don't think it's Mendez. I think it's Menendez, who founded the city in 1565. There's a huge cross where he stepped ashore and they celebrated Mass, and now it's the cross is on a land that's a church. It's not a church, it's a place to train people for the church, something like that. huge cross. Lots of firsts in that city. The oldest wooden schoolhouse remaining in the country is there. It's from the 1700s. The fort that captured my imagination of my childhood, it's from the 1700s. It's the Castillo de San Marcos. So the city has a connection to St. Mark, so that's why there's lions in several places. Mark is represented by the lion. Matthew is the man or the angel, the messenger. Mark is the lion. Sometimes the lion has wings. Luke is the ox. Sometimes the ox or the cow or the cattle has wings. And sometimes, and nearly all the time, John is represented by the eagle. So we've got the 4 Gospels. Each has a representative. Mark is the lion, so that's why the statue in St. Mark's in Venice has the lion. That's why there are lions around in St. Augustine. And obviously a lot of religious stuff spoken about in a touristy manner. We went to the Pirate and Treasure Museum. Pretty small, very interesting, done very well, I think. Or I was in a good mood when we went through it. But we went through following a group of kids that were being given a tour by somebody playing a pirate. He did a great job. I think he really engaged the kids in the history of the pirates and the differences between the depictions of pirates in popular culture, which he said began with Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, and then of course movies and video games and other books. And he talked about what they actually did as opposed to what the Hollywood conception is. They asked lots of good questions. I think their teachers prepared them for the trip, so they'd get a lot out of it. We saw a group of kids at the fort, the Castillo de San Marcos. It's right there on the intercoastal, which is the Matanzas River as well. It's this other name. And we were told that the Castillo was also called the Fort St. Mark Fort or Fort St. Mark, but then it was Fort Marion, occupied by different troops. Like I said, the Spanish monarchists, the Spanish Republicans. They have the only obelisk still remaining that celebrated the Constitution that turned the Spanish monarchy into the Spanish Republic. They said that the marker there is from that time. Didn't look particularly old. They said that every Spanish town had a marker celebrating the Constitution, and a plaza, a park, an empty grassy area in the middle of town, and a cathedral. Lots of pretty churches there. Then we talked about the Flagler takeover of St. Augustine with the luxury hotels, the Leitner Museum, the Casa Monica, I think the Ponce de Leon Hotel. I don't know, these huge luxury hotels, one of which was the only building in town that had electricity, and the first one to have good running water. Lots of emphasis on first. And the oldest, and the other superlatives. The Castillo de San Marcos was never conquered, they said. We got to look at a lot of cannons. Talked about the differences between howitzers and cannons. I noticed that the brass and steel, iron, the brass cannons and the other cannons would be marked with where they were made, Seville, and other Spanish cities. But they were also marked with when they were taken over by another force. So if the cannon was captured in battle, like the one I remember that was captured in the Battle of Veracruz, that would be on the barrel of the cannon as well. I was reminded that Chief Osceola was imprisoned in the Castillo de San Marcos. I was incorrect about a couple things, if we can trust history. I thought he died there, but apparently he was imprisoned there for just a short time. Chief Osceola was fathered by a Scottish man and a Creek mother, Lower Creek, I think. They didn't mention that Seminole meant runaway, but I think it's fascinating that we have the record of how a tribe formed. We have the stories of slaves who ran away, left Georgia to go to Florida because Florida wasn't under British control at the time. Osceola, who led the Seminoles. They had uniforms of each of the epochs of the fort's history. And of course the flags of each one. They talked about how the fort is deliberately low. You know, they have to build it a little high above the water table because of Florida being so close to the water and the water being so close to the surface of the ground. But they would dig ramparts, dig the ground lower and have it slope so that it'd be hard for a cannon to hit it. They talked about the coquina, Coquina, which is the rocks formed from shells along the shore, and how they would make rocks from the coquina. And that was a good defense against cannonballs. Somebody in a tour said that the cannonballs would bounce off. Somebody said that they would create a little damage as opposed to, blast through the wall. And some said that they would get embedded in the wall. I don't think that was true, because I didn't see any evidence of that, and that was only mentioned once. But boy, that's a good story. But I do think that what they're getting at is coquina, because it's made of all those tiny shells. It's just a better defense than something that would crack more decisively, like the whatever else was available there. It was great to me that there's a lot of nature areas still there. I think it's the Matanzas National Forest, Matanzas State Forest. Matanzas Forest is close by. That the city itself doesn't allow buildings of a much height, so you still see the spires of the churches and hotels. And right next to the city we saw dolphins, other wildlife, lots of birds, because there's lots of areas that are left alone. And it was a nice trip. Some of the tourist attractions were better than others. Clearly, obviously. And I have a whole series of things to look up on Google, see what they want to tell me about it. But now I'm distracted, or not really distracted. I'm moving on to a new show, and that has a lot of connections that spring to mind. So I think there's one or two more trivia questions that I got from St. Augustine that I really enjoyed, but I can't remember at the moment. I've arrived at work and practiced my camera skills. So, no wrecks on the way. Hope you have a great day.